afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kadir Ustun. I'm the Executive Director here at SETA Foundation at Washington, D.C. We have a great panel today of experts to discuss Turkey's latest Jarablus operation in northern Syria. As you all know, what started as an uprising against a repressive regime more than 5 years ago has turned into a protracted civil war in Syria. And it's been difficult, if impossible, to contain the spillover effects, such as the refugee crisis and the international terrorism, among others. Most will tell you the conflict is unlikely to end soon, as it also turned into a regional proxy war. Regional states with conflicting interests seem to be managing the spillover effects, but also try to protect their own interests. In terms of the fight against ISIL, northern Syria has become a battleground where there are multiple actors and groups with diverging interests and goals also. So, on top of all those dynamics, we have the most recent US-Russia agreement on cessation of hostilities, but it's not clear if that agreement will hold, and it's not clear how it might contribute to the ending of the war. Today, we'll be focusing on Turkey's Jarablus operation that started on August 24th with the stated goal of liberating Jarablus from ISIL. And we will try to discuss how that operation plays into the local and regional dynamics that I just talked about. And we have an excellent panel of experts, analysts, to discuss these issues. I won't read their full biographies. You should have them in the handouts. To my left, Bassam Barabandi is a former Syrian diplomat and a co-founder of People Demand Change, a US-based organization working on conflict mediation and resolution, civil society and humanitarian relief in Syria. To his left, Heras, you're right there. Nicholas Heras is a research associate in the Middle East Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. Our own Kilic Kanat is the research director here at SETA Foundation at Washington, D.C. And Dr. Denise Natali is a senior research fellow at the Institute for National Strategic Studies of the National Defense University. So we switched the order a bit during our little panel back in the map room. So we'll start with Kilic first, and then move on to Nick, and then Denise and Bassam. So, Kilic, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We know we have only limited knowledge actually about the operation and the details of it, but when we look at the operation, we can see that this operation was a delayed and overdue operation because most of the debates in Turkey and most of the leaks about the security establishment in Turkey signaled that there may be an operation in November 2015 towards Jarablus and that area actually. It wasn't only Jarablus. And the primary concern was again ISIS and YPG, but these were the days that the refugee crisis were its height. So international dimension of it, international support for it was coming from mostly as a result of the refugee crisis and to create a safe zone, whatever, at that time it was ISIS-free zone because the zone's name constantly changing. So it was no-fly zone, safe zone. At that time it was ISIS-free zone in order to clear the region from the ISIS, especially the borders area of Turkey from ISIS. Of course, since then there are serious terrorist attacks in Turkey, and one of the most significant one was actually because of the coup. We stopped discussing that, after a while, but the most significant one was probably the Istanbul attack. The Ankara attacks of PKK and the Istanbul attack, especially the airport attack of ISIS, pushed Turkey to do something more significant in terms of clearing the region, especially from ISIS. So the Gaziantep attack probably be the trigger. There was already some concerns about Kilis, the security of Kilis. Last year, actually, when we were in Kilis with my colleague, we see how the Katyusha rockets created major concern among the society, and the insecurity that it created resulted in some serious debate about what Turkey should do in terms of an operation. But of course, all of these were stalled with the Russian plane crisis that started in November 2015. And now, after the agreement with Russia or rapprochement with Russia, the first, probably the triggering effect, if we try to answer why now, was probably the ISIS, Gaziantep attack, and Istanbul attack. The secondly, the unwillingness, of course, at this point, YPG to leave Manbij, because from the reports we understand that there are some significant at that point. There was an agreement, a pseudo agreement between Turkey and US that YPG will leave after the Manbij operation, which turned out to be not true. And after the establishment of Manbij Military Council, actually, when YPG established Jarablus Military Council, it was a signal, it was a red flag for Turkey. So a second reason was this. A third reason, of course, the refugee crisis again. It may not be in the agenda of international community anymore, especially in Europe, but this crisis is still taking place. And especially with the increasing attacks and clashes in Aleppo, there's a real danger that there may be a serious wave of refugees coming from Syria to Turkey. And partly, we can only speculate that, but probably after the July 15 coup, the change in the military leadership, especially the military leadership in the Second Army and some within the special forces may play an important role. We can only speculate about this at this point. So what happened? The operation started in a very short period of time. Actually, Turkey, the first goal of Turkey was to clear the area, especially the border area, from ISIS. So now from El Rai to Jarablus, the area is cleared, but the depth of the area is not sufficient at this point. So far, the depth is around 20 kilometers, and the 20 kilometers is at this point considered not sufficient. However, the operation, it started really fast, but now slowed down because of some necessities and some risks that emerge, actually. We see that there is a very serious risk of anti-tank missiles to Turkish forces, because Turkey entered, the Turkish incursion was not through special forces, but with armored units as well. So there were, at the beginning it was 10 tanks, but then it increased. Now around 25 to 30 tanks are in northern Syria, that part. The second problem was a little bit resolved, the improvised explosive device issue. That was a little resolved because they are not using the regular roads, but there are still serious concern about the landmines. With the couple attacks of ISIS to Jarablus FSA units in Jarablus, we started to see that there may be serious concern about the suicide attacks of ISIS. Because what we see in multiple different instances, and we see this in Kobani as well, the moment that ISIS lost a territory, they go back to their default settings and started to organize more conventional terrorist attacks in those areas. So this is a serious concern for the security of Turkish forces and the FSA forces. Because of that, now 20 kilometers is kind of be kept, but the next step is a big question mark. So what are the possible outcomes? The repopulation of Jarablus and surrounding towns and villages are especially important, because immediately after the liberation of Jarablus, people in Turkey, especially from Karakamış and then, from the refugee camps in Nizip, the south of Gaziantep, people started to move to Jarablus, and early reports showed that the population of Jarablus increased from 3,500 to more than 10,000 right now, and the passages from the Turkish border to Jarablus is increasing, and Turkish government is also supporting that. Turkish government in a couple of days provided water, electricity, and Afad and Kızılay established some relief areas actually with water and healthcare, etc. And this actually increases reignite the debate about the safe zone, that it may work, that refugees, when they are safe, when they feel safe, they may go back to Jarablus. The second outcome will be the debate, probably a trilateral debate in regards to the future of Münbic. So Turkish position is very clear at this point. Turkish government asked, and U.S. government supported actually the Vice President Biden's last visit. Vice President Biden asked YPG to leave the east of Euphrates, and but there are still some concern, and from the clashes we see that there are actually YPG forces on the east of Euphrates, despite some statements from the U.S. government. So it is not clear what will be the future of Münbic at this point, right? Turkey and FSA forces, if they argue that if there is no YPG forces or SDF forces, whatever you call, FSA forces should enter Münbic, but there is serious concerns. The second one is the relation between YPG and Turkey, of course. There is serious clashes took place, especially when the Turkish forces and FSA forces moved south of the Jarablus, and I think it was 10 miles to Münbic that there was some clashes, and 2 of the tanks of Turkish army was actually attacked by YPG forces in that area. So this is also another problem, and the problem will not end when YPG forces will go to the east of Euphrates, because considering the situation, the clashes between PKK and Turkey right now, and PKK attacks actually to Turkey, we can see that even after YPG passes to east of Euphrates, we will continue to see some serious issues about YPG's presence in northern Syria. Another one is, of course, the morale and power of opposition. Since the beginning of the crisis, FSA constantly suffered from internal problems, but one of the most significant issues was the lack of support for the FSA forces. And each and every time when someone interviews FSA forces wanted the support that YPG or other forces are getting against ISIS. And this short operation actually helped FSA forces to get more morale and more power. And I'm finishing this. And finally, in the fight against ISIS, this is a new front, so it provides a lot of opportunity for international coalition to fight against ISIS. But as I mentioned before, the main debate is about what will happen in El Bab, right? So El Bab is 40 kilometers from the Turkish border. So the FSA forces needs definitely air cover at El Bab in an operation. And El Bab has been a logistical center of ISIS for a long time now. And it was pretty fortified, especially after the withdrawal of the ISIS forces from Jarablus. So the operation in El Bab needs a good coordination, a good air cover, and a lot of FSA forces. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Start by saying that the United States stands to reap significant benefits from Turkey's intervention into Jarablus, Operation Ukrainian Shield, in a push to displace ISIS from territory that is pulled from the Syrian-Turkish border, and also over time to stage a campaign against Raqqa that sees ISIS's putative capital. So objectively speaking, Operation Ukrainian Shield is one of the most important developments to date in the Syrian civil war, and particularly for the U.S. perspective, for 3 reasons. First, Operation Euphrates Shield should be assessed for its success or failure for its ability to be a vehicle for a local Syrian armed opposition campaign to displace and replace ISIS with the promise of sustained and direct Turkish military and humanitarian assistance to the opposition movement over the long term and on the ground inside of Syria. Perhaps some of my colleagues in the room might not want to hear this or to have it characterized this way, but Operation Euphrates Shield is Turkey's version of the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces Coalition, but with a different ethnic composition. But like with the U.S. effort with this SDF, Turkey will have to manage a coalition of disparate armed opposition groups, have them seize terrain from ISIS, hold that terrain, and allow local governance structures to form, and then to have the Euphrates Shield coalition serve as a vehicle to attract, mobilize, and provide a basis to take the fight to ISIS, whether in Al-Bab, Raqqa, or territories further afield. Second, the stated objective of Turkey to construct a safe zone for refugees as a part of its direct, on-the-ground military presence in northern Syria, working by, with, and through local Syrian armed opposition partners, would dramatically expand the area of the country that is, for all intents and purposes, off-limits to Assad regime and Russian military activities. Whether we like to hear it or not, the United States has created a de facto safe zone and territorial sphere of influence in northeastern Syria, working through the Syrian Democratic Forces Coalition. If, and this is a big if of course, a Turkish-built safe zone is allowed to function, there will be a long stretch of territory along the Turkish-Syrian border, from Hasaka in the east to potentially Azaz in the west, that will be, for all intents and purposes, a no-go zone for any type of significant Assad regime and Russian military activity. Third, and perhaps most important from the perspective of providing options for a future escalation of U.S. military involvement in Syria, the vehicle of the Operations Euphrates Shield, Turkey has the opportunity to demonstrate that it can support the development of a truly unified and politically moderate or acceptable armed opposition coalition that can not only displace ISIS, but that it can replace ISIS's governance in captured territory by supporting local councils that promote acceptable, non-ideologically extremist governance structures. This is a key point because one of the major criticisms of the feasibility of a safe zone is that because the Syrian armed opposition is mobbled up with ideological extremist actors, that a safe zone would become a safe haven for al-Qaeda and its enablers in Syria. Now, all three of these points are interrelated, and there do remain significant challenges that prevent Operation Euphrates Shield from reaching all of these stated objectives, and they present a dilemma for Turkish military and U.S. military options in Syria. There remains the open question whether Turkey will be able to build a coalition of Syrian armed opposition groups within the Euphrates Shield that can make the United States confident enough that they can provide force protection for potentially U.S. and other coalition special forces to embed with them. This is a major demand of many of the U.S.-backed armed opposition groups west of the Euphrates. They want a more direct U.S. presence, and they want the same privileges of having embedded U.S. special forces with them that the U.S. gives to the Syrian Democratic Forces Coalition. However, the problem is that when I talk to U.S. military professionals that are responsible for the counter-ISIS campaign in Syria, they say to me that the major motivating factor for the U.S. to build up the SDF in October 2015, so about a year ago now, was that after a year of engagement with the EPG and their allied SA militias, the U.S. military was confident enough that the SDF would provide coalition special forces with reasonable force protection to allow U.S. special forces to embed with them. The other important factor that led to the creation of the SDF was that the U.S. military wanted to cut out the middleman, so to speak, and identify, mobilize, train, equip, and advise local Syrian partners that would be able to take the fight to ISIS. There was a perception that the armed opposition groups and fighters that were presented to the U.S. military by Turkey weren't up to the task. And that, in part, led to the motivation of the creation of the SDF. Now, Turkey's ability to change this perception through Operation Euphrates Shield will depend on its ability to maintain the unity of the armed opposition groups that it has assembled through the Euphrates Shield coalition, to expand the Euphrates Shield Coalition to allow it to be an effective vehicle to mobilize other armed opposition fighters that are currently present in Turkey now, that are from the area of Raqqa, in order to take and hold territory in and around Raqqa. The ball is in Turkey's court. One major complaint that I hear from U.S. military professionals is that the counter-ISIS campaign in Syria has had significant difficulty mobilizing fighters in the Raqqa area. Now, part of this is the product of the fact that there are legitimate Syrian Arab and other ethnic concerns over the Syrian Kurds' ambitions, and particularly in the potential intention to seize land and potentially perform acts of ethnic cleansing. However, U.S. military professionals that I talk to that are engaged in the counter-ISIS campaign in Syria say once they got past that hurdle with these Syrian Arab fighters in the area of Raqqa, Turkish pressure on these fighters to not join the SDF severely hampered their ability to recruit and mobilize this force. However, with the establishment of Operation Euphrates Shield, Turkey can leap this hurdle and build up this force in order to present a credible vehicle to take the fight to ISIS and to seize Raqqa. The Operation Euphrates Shield can succeed if it is able to combine the following three elements that I identified as being essential to building up the capacity of the Syrian armed opposition from the bottom up. First, gain legitimacy with Syrian communities at the local level. Second, be willing to provide sustained conventional military support. And third, and this is potentially the most important, exercise strategic patience to accomplish these overarching objectives. This will be a very important component of Operation Euphrates Shield, and we should all watch it very closely. A step in the right direction is that in my recent conversations with armed opposition commanders that are Syrian armed opposition commanders that are part of the Operation Euphrates Shield, they confirm that it is their understanding that Turkey not only has provided them with assurances that it will have strategic patience, but that it will empower them to unite the various armed opposition groups under a joint command to help them build security infrastructure that will support local councils that can outcompete ISIS, Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, and its other enablers, and to protect the local population and to provide humanitarian assistance and the normal cross-border trade between Turkey and Syria. The ball is in Turkey's court.
Thank you. Denise.
Thank you to SETA and to Kadir for having me here. Again, I want to just give a disclaimer that my views are my own and not those of the Department of Defense or the U.S. government or National Defense University. Kadir asked me to specifically look at the PYD's role in this offensive, or or in the countering ISIL campaign, and what it means for the future. And I want to tease out some of the complexities or complications that are arising between the United States and Turkey, and how we can move forward. I'm glad, by the way, that when Kadir created the question, it was, what does it mean for the conflict in northern Syria? And the assumption is that there's many conflicts, so that when we're looking at the counter-ISIL campaign in Syria, and not so much as in Iraq, this has been superimposed over many conflicts, so that in Syria, number two, as a state, has become so hyper-fragmented, and the conflicts are so hyper-localized. So what goes on in northern Syria doesn't necessarily affect or directly affect what happens in southern Syria and the campaign elsewhere. So I can't say that this offensive is a game changer or it's going to fundamentally alter the prospects of negotiating Syria, but it will look at a particular part of the country. I want to start with, if we want to understand how we got to where we are with the PYG, and I want to build on what some of Nick said, I want to make some comments on U.S. strategy. My own views, not the government's. We did make a decision a while back that instead of, and this affects how the PYD got to where it is now, we made a decision not to put ground troops in, and this will likely go into the future, that we will rely by, with, and through, as Nick said, that is our strategy, by, with, and through local partners. That is the first part of it, although we may have about 5,000 advisors or so. Who are willing, who would they be? Those groups willing to fight ISIL and radical jihadists first. And I want to add, although Nick said that there was an issue of we couldn't find capable enough partners, there was also another issue. And it was, remember back at that time, who was willing to prioritize fighting the jihadists first? And we had a problem with some of the other groups because they wanted to fight Assad first. And it was the Kurds that clearly made those two things clear. They wanted to fight the jihadists first and ISIL, and there was nothing else. So that also did help our decision of how we got to where the PYD was. And the second part of that is not only choosing whoever's going to fight ISIL first, but it was enabling those partners. And here's where we got into some of the trouble between us and Turkey. And that meant training, military support, and providing weapons. And so that early effort, to remember the way back, that very initial dropping of aid to the PYD years back, and that was supposed to be only a one-time off because it had wrangled so much in Turkey, has become something far bigger. And it followed, if you can recall, that failure of our train and equip. When we found out, when there was that session in Congress or the testimonies where we only had trained less than a dozen or so. So immediately after that, how did we pick up where we left off? And there was the PYD, create the SDF, and nonetheless to keep this momentum that there would be some kind of success. So I got a little bit more cynicism in the fact that there was an effort and we needed to keep this effort, and the PYD was there to fulfill these two objectives. Fight ISIL first and be willing to obviously be the United States boots on the ground. And this is what they essentially are, the same way that the Peshmerga are in the South. Now, what has this done? There have been direct consequences, and then there's the unintended consequences. The direct consequences, obviously, as the PYG, PYD, or YPG has earned the reputation of being the most effective force fighting ISIL. You can't get around that. And, of course, they have become the U.S. boots on the ground. It's the unintended consequences that I don't think have been fully thought through, second and third order consequences of the enabling part. And what has that been? It has been not only allowing the PYD, unintentionally or not, to expand its territory, some say about 186%, but it's also, I should say, enhanced their credibility, semi-legitimized the group, enabled them, motivated them, whatever you may be. Nonetheless, this is where the breakdown is, I think, and what our expectations were and what the opportunities the PYG thought it could take or get away with. But nonetheless, many of the very important alliances that the Kurds had at the local level, let's say the councils in Aleppo, they have broken down because of some of the sense of imbalance, empowerment, whatever it may be, that the Kurds have taken or the PYD has taken over the time. Now, so we've alienated a lot of groups. There's been a recent statement, I don't know if anybody's heard, the disconnect by Jamal Baik. I was just yesterday at the PKK head in the Condil Mountains. It was extremely terse, saying that the fighting would continue. I think that the PKK or the PYD has a sense of feeling even more enabled. And there is absolutely no incentive whatsoever on either side to negotiate. And obviously, Turkey hasn't helped that either. But nonetheless, I think this campaign is also feeding into the sense of empowerment, not only for the PKK side, the Turkey side, but the PKK. Now, and there's a final point. That is, this has expanded the AOR, the area of operations, not only of Turkey, but of the PKK. So that is to say, with the PYG. We've got this, we've talked about Syria, but we also have northern Iraq. So this is also going on, not just in this one area of a weakened state where borders have become porous, but also northern Iraq where the PKK can move back and forth. And again, when you're talking about Syria and the AOR, you've got to talk about PKK's movement between Turkey, Iraq, and Syria now in a much more expansive territory. And this is also where I see Turkey can get bogged down. Here's some of the limitations, and here's where I see we, Turkey, the PYD partners, there's been a lot of misperceptions and miscalculations, and where we have erred. The PYD, there's been discussions that this is going to create an important cleavage between the United States and Turkey, and this is going to create, problems. I don't see it that way at all. I think, first of all, our by, with, and through program from the outset was complicated. We knew we had to balance very many different partners, and the other part of it is differentiating between our tactical allies and our strategic allies. Now, perhaps the PYG along the way, or YPG, thought that they were strategic, but I don't see how at any point since the beginning of this, the United States has not indicated anything but the fact that they would be tactical, and that this relationship would be transactional, and that's from the very beginning, even when we talked about providing aid to the Kurds and the YPG, it was always through or trying to assure that Turkey's interests or that we wouldn't overstep in some ways. And let me give you a couple examples. We know about that whole patch incident when some of our special forces were embedded and it became public that they were wearing some of these YPG patches. Well, that didn't last very long, and they were certainly taken off. There was also other issues about never inviting the PYD to the conferences in Geneva. There was no recognition of the PYD's autonomy project or cantons, and I can go on and on. So we have to be clear as well that along the way the United States has made it clear that this was a tactical alliance. And then, and even more importantly, as was noted by our speakers, not only did Vice President Biden make it clear to say you will not get American support if you don't move east of the Euphrates, General Hunford did the same. And lo and behold, they did move. Most of them moved. I'm sure the residual forces. So again, I think the United States has been clear that the Kurds have been tactical. I don't see personally that they're going to move beyond the tactical level. They will try their best, but nonetheless, where's the problem has been? The problem has been in where I think we've erred in some part is sending mixed signals. We have not. We've erred to the PYD, we've erred to the Kurds, we've erred to Turkey. We're sending mixed signals by every point along the way. We've said this is tactical, yet we have high-level visits to the YPG. Yet we're not clear about the territorial integrity until we say it. I mean, I think that we could have been clearer so as not to get into the situation where we had to be. That is, Turkey comes into Jarablus and the United States has to say, now you have to leave. That could have been done. It should have been done about 2 years ago. And we could have avoided some of it. So I think, and I'll get into some of my recommendations, but it's not that it's the lack of clarity that has caused some of the problems and created some of the problems. Not that the United States and Turkey are on the same page that this is not strategic. And with the Kurds as well. Many of the Kurds I speak to, they know this. They know that the United States is not going to lose this strategic relationship with Turkey. But we need greater clarity on this issue for everybody involved, because what will happen is there will be a backlash against the Kurds, and that wouldn't be helpful either. I want to make a final point about this Raqqa and moving forward. As we look at this idea that the Syrian Kurds, are they essential? Is the PYD essential to the campaign? And my answer at this point is no. They've been extremely important in taking territories that they want to take, and it's the same thing as Iraq. But why would they have interest or effectiveness in areas that are Sunni Arab majority controlled? And so any idea that the Kurds should be used to go into Raqqa, the center of Raqqa, and then move out, I find this folly. And at this point, I'm not talking about 2 years ago, some of these territories have been taken. At this point, the key ISIL strongholds are largely Sunni Arab territories. So you have to engage with, you like it or not, the local populations that control these areas. And that would be the same way as saying, let's get a Sunni Arab force to go into the Kurdish territories and think that they can take and hold. We just have to be realistic and deal with the hands that we have, given the fact that our troops aren't going to be on the ground. So no, I don't think the PYD can go into Raqqa, and no, I don't think that they can go save Aleppo and some of these other areas. We need to understand the limitations of our proxies and not over-determine their leverage. This is another problem. So, again, I don't see this as a dangerous cleavage. I want to give some suggestions, I would say, policy implications, how we can move forward, and we can have greater discussions on it. Largely looking at us, but I can say some of the issues for Turkey. I think one of our problems is we've been mirror imaging a little bit too much on threat perceptions. If we keep telling Turkey, you have to prioritize ISIL first, and Kurds in Turkey stop fighting. If you understand the trajectory of Turkey over the last nearly 100 years, 45 of which has included an insurgency with the PKK, it's going to be very difficult for Turkey to get involved in ISIL campaign without having it through a PKK lens. It just can't happen. So the more we tell them to stop fighting as this insurgency is going, it's just not going to be effective. And the more that the balance of power locally is shifted, this will actually have repercussions, and it could actually be counterproductive. So we need to take these threat perceptions and strategic priorities of the local partners we're relying on into greater consideration, if this is the path we choose to go. If we decide to put in tens and thousands of ground forces, then that's another calculus. Secondly, and I say this as a follow-up to what General Dunford and Vice President Bryden did the other day, and the immediate effects, was to continue to reaffirm the parameters of our support to our local partners. If we're going to support, we're not going to support you up to these territories. Don't give them any indication or any encouragement to move into areas that in fact may be to their disadvantage and that they can't hold. Is the United States going to be the Air Force for these groups for a long time and to hold these territories? I don't think so. Third, I think that we should refrain from using words like federalism, ethno-sectarian partition of Syria when we're looking at, political solutions afterwards. How do we not antagonize local groups? Syria is very hyper-fragmented and hyper-localized. I don't see, it didn't work in Iraq, by the way. We heard this for decades. It Kurd, Sunni, Shia region, and this is just absolutely not reflective of realities on the ground. We can talk about decentralized administration, ways in which different localities can gain greater autonomy or self-governance, but this is one way to, again, antagonize the local partners that we need to move forward with ISIS. How do you lessen the fears of Kurdish empowerment? As we've agreed, there has been balance of power shifts, and the fact of the matter is the Kurdish groups have gained control of some areas. It's not the fact that they've gained control so much, it's the idea that how do you make sure that Turkey or other Sunni Arab groups are less threatened by this? The idea that you will have some kind of Kurdish entity on your border that isn't necessarily a threat, because right now it is. It is because the PYD, the more territory the PYD takes, the more it's reliant on the PKK as a force to hold these territories, and the PKK now needs the PYD to legitimize them. So at this point, I can't see the two of them ever be extracted for the near future. And we can be working with Turkey to enhance border security. We've all agreed one of the unintended consequences of this incursion was the fact that there's a lot of people who are committed to the territorial integrity of Syria, and even the Kurds. I don't think there is not one regional actor who wants to see Syria break up. There's a reordering of borders inside the state. So affirming this shared strategic end state, that Syria, as weakened as it is, the borders stay intact, and we worked from there. And finally, I want to make a point about I can't even say the word post-war stabilization. Let's just say stabilizing areas where certain groups have been expelled. Turkey, if you look at a border, this happened in the 90s when we were working Operation Provide Comfort in northern Iraq. It couldn't happen without the border being opened with Turkey. It can't happen. And the border between North Syria and the Kurds and Turkey is even larger than the Iraqi Kurds, the border with the Iraqi Kurds and Turkey. So how do you make it in Turkey's interest, and the Kurds' interest, by the way? Many I've talked to know that they can't move forward without good relations with Turkey and the Arab partners. How do you make this in both groups' interests without feeling threatened that Turkey is not a threat? And I do think right now, nationalist politics aside, that these groups need their areas reconstructed. They want electricity, they want jobs, and they want business. And there is business going on, by the way, between these two groups. So these are some of the things I think that how we can move forward, and I'd be glad to continue this discussion in the Q&A. Thank you.
Yes.
I think I have to answer all the questions. I have so many ideas.
Sorry.
For me, I'll try to discuss it from completely different angles. So from Syrian angles, how we see this. We have to be very, very systematic in the way of thinking about this problem, the Kurdish problem in Syria, Jarablus things. There's no doubt the Kurds suffered from Assad regime for the last 30 years, from 1963 to today. And we should not forget that they were not only the people who were suffering from Assad regime, and all the Syrian people were suffering from Assad regime, but they were more than others. When the revolution started in 2011, we should not forget that in Jarablus and in other other Kurdish area, the people, the Kurds, they were with the Syrian revolution. They were Syrian. Their ID was Syrian. We cannot forget the Alawite. They went to the street with the revolution. They were Syrian. Or they are Syrian. And the same for the people of SETA. So I'm talking about the minorities in Syria. So the first couple of weeks of the revolution, even more than at least 6 to 8 weeks of the revolution, we were not thinking about the minorities issues or ethnic groups, all the flyers, all the slogans. It was Syrian. We are Syrian people, we are one blood, one hand, and everybody was against Bashar and against the regime in general. So now what we are seeing is completely different pictures, and I can attribute it to the system the regime used in order to divide the people. So part of them were the Kurds. I will focus mainly on the Kurds because of this event. The Kurds, the revolutionary guys from Syria, they try to approach the Kurds from the early days and try to find some compromise or some common ground with them, taking into consideration that we are all Syrian. And nobody think about dividing Syria or ethnic groups or anything. It was red line, and I think that today is red line because we should not forget again that Syria for the last, since independence till today, it was highly affected by Arabism, which is we are all Arabs, of unity of Arabism. So it's become very difficult to anyone to accept divisions of Syria or ethnic minorities privileged than others. So when the starting point, when the Kurds starting to communicate with the Syrian or the Arabs on that way, the Kurds for a while, they were very much positive. Then they start to raise the demands. We need our flags, we need our language, we need our culture, we need that to reach to see our territory. And then they say, we have our map for our own territory. The other side, the Arabs at the same time, we were still in the revolution. We are still in the revolution at that time. We were under attack from Assad every day. No one was in position to say to the Kurds, yes, we can accommodate you. Nobody had legitimacy to tell the Kurds we can't do it. The message we try, me, myself, and others, to tell to the Kurds, the more you join the Syrian in their fight against Assad, the more you will get, because people recognize you. So later on, 5, 6 years, whatever, whenever we have constitution, we have rights, you will get everything you want. And they refused. At the same time, Assad he talked with the Kurdish National Council. He asked them to work with him against the Arab Revolution. They refused, and he told them, Assad, if I'm not wrong, he told them that if you will not work with us, we will find some people else who work with us. And then they brought Saleh Muslim. And the first step to empower that movement of national Kurdish ID, they left them their Milan oil field in Hasaka, and they gave it to the Kurds. So now the Kurds, they have the feeling of the ID, that they can get their own ID. They have the money, and the regime never attacked them, so they have stability. Whereas all the other neighbors, they were facing the opposite. No food, attacking, and they are more busy in Assad things rather than in Kurdish issue. Nobody thought about the Kurdish as a problem for us. So I'm trying to answer some of my colleagues' perceptions because it's a little bit different from the reality. So day by day, when ISIS becomes superpower in that area, they take all over the areas, nobody fight them. The Arabs, they tried their best, the Syrian Arabs, they tried their best to tell the Americans, we can fight ISIS. And the Americans say, you know what, you are Sunni. We cannot trust Sunnis. And that's why in the train and equal program, we have major problem about why the Americans, they train only 50 or 20 people, whereas they were sending the weapons by parachute for the Kurds without even vetting them. So there was a big problem between the major Arab and with the Americans. We think, and to today we think, that the Arabs are the Arab Sunnis are the only people who can defeat ISIS. So when Jarablus operation started to work, many Syrian free armies, they came to join it. I think the number started by 1,800. Today it's something like 3,500. The number will go to 6,000 to 7,000 Syrian. And most of these people, they were trained, or in a way they get vetted by the United States, but never used by the United States. The Turks, they say, this is our enemy, it's ISIS. This is our enemy, it's the Kurds. The Kurds, unfortunately, for the last 1 year, They benefit very much from the American dream to fight ISIS through them. They did ethnic cleanings. It's Amnesty reports, it's clear, so I'm not claiming anything. They did all the bad things to make the Arab feel hate against them. In Raqqa, in Hasaka, Sori, in Tal Abyad, so many areas, they just gave the Arab. They burned their houses. Sometimes they say, you are welcome to come back, but you don't have any houses anymore. So all this created that feelings, we hate them, or they are with Assad. I'm sure they are not with Assad. But when you are under attack, daily attack, you cannot differentiate with your enemy. You just, everybody's one basket. So when the war on Jarablus started, I think it has been welcomed by more Arabs, very much all the Arab battalions. Many people joined them voluntarily. Some people were asked to join. As I said, the number is increasing and will be increased. The Arab finally, as my colleague said, that they feel they are recognized as fighters on the ground against what the American policy toward them just put them on hold. And they did the job. There's a big myth that PYD is the strong part on the ground. They are the troops on the ground, or they can make success. It's a big myth. You don't forget Kobani has been attacked by the American forces or the coalition forces at least God knows how many weeks before the PYD come into the Kobani. And Kobani is a small village with something like 40,000. It takes them at least a couple of weeks to be liberated. You take that model to Jarablus, which is a big city, bigger than Kobani, in 3 days. Number one. Number two, whenever Tal Abyad fight, once with PYD they went to liberate Tal Abyad, ISIS made so many bombs, car bombs in Hasaka and in Kamshli. And when I asked the guys there from PYD guys, how you allow 20 cars to go to your areas, they say simply we don't have fighters. All the fighters are in the other side of the country, in Tal Abyad. So there's big myth of numbers, big myth of power support. I think it's more about how much they get Air Force support, how much people really count on them. This is what we're missing as an Arab, as a Syrian, Syria. From day one, from revolution to today, we never get real support, we never get real endorsement. We always have talking support, but we never get real thing. Today, when Turkey did something, everybody sympathy with Turkey because they are hosting millions of Syrians, and they didn't change their position on Assad or their position on the Syrian revolution from day one till today. So all this create more comfortable relation with Jarablus issue. Turkey, even though they changed some villages or their military announcement when they mentioned the Arab villages of Syria, they put it in Turkmeni, and the Syrians say having this not Turkmeni, it's Syrian. So either to be Kurdi or Turkmeni, and we say no, this is Syrian, to make sure this is Syrian. In Jarablus, I think they did the good model that the American failed to do, even when they spent more than $2 billion in Syria. The local councils, the electricity, the water, the humanitarian. They try, I think they learned all the experience and they are implemented in Syria very quickly. I believe they will go to Bab. People are ready to go to Bab. I believe I will not be surprised if they will go to Raqqa as well, or they will be part of Raqqa. PYD definitely they don't have any interest to go to Raqqa, but still they will be used by the Americans from the northern part of Raqqa, not from the south part of Raqqa. PYD, unfortunately, we always tell our friends, the Kurds, that you are historically being used by international power and then they throw you under the bus. And we always tell you guys, please listen from you have your small entity or empire or state in Iran from 1940s, then Saddam Hussein gave you something, then the Turks give you something, and you always being failed by the international communities. Syria is a very good model for you to be Syrian, and within Syria you can get what you want. And they always say, no, this time is different. And what made things worse for them, I feel sorry and pity for them actually, when the Russian were the first country, superpower, or regional power, super regional power, when they say to the Kurds that you will have federation. And nobody was ever talk about federation. They have it in their mind, they always talk it. But even the Americans, they never promised them that you have such anything. The Russians told them that you will have federation, and when we talk with the Americans, what you think, they say there's a competition between us and the Russian. So if we fail to give them something, or we try to put pressure on the Kurds to get something, the Russia will come and give them more. And it's a free talks. So we give you space, we give you weapons, we give something. Till today, I think they are failing. Militarily, maybe they are gaining some lands. The population of the Kurds, as my colleague said, all their area are Arabs, mainly are Arabs, Africans Arabs. In their areas is Arabs. There are more Arabs in their area than the Kurds, because all the people who went away from their Zor, Raqqa, south of Hasaka, Hama suburbs, all they went to Kurdish area because it was de facto no-fly zone. Assad never attacked it, the Russian, American, it was really no-fly zone till today. So I don't know what the numbers of Kurds, they believe that they are 1 million, the estimate is 500,000, but definitely there's more than 1 million Arabs in that area. So it doesn't work with them in all it. As I'm working as a consultant with agency. With agency, the position is very clear that Saleh Muslim is terrorist, PYD are terrorist. The Kurds are, again, they're being hijacked by this international community as a tools, but they are Syrian. And we try to help them as much as we can. And the same thing goes to the Alawite, same thing goes to other minorities who are Syrian number one, regardless of their religion or ethnicity. And they're being hijacked and used by the regime just to promote himself in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Bassam.
I'm not academic like them, sorry.
Bassam, maybe I just have quick questions to the panelists. Maybe we go back to you right away. You talked about them not, the Kurds, PYD, especially not being effective, but in the U.S. perspective, that's just the opposite. So, and when you look at the map, there is no ISIL there. Is that how does that challenge your?
We always said we don't always the American give us the air support and look what the Free Syrian army will do. We always say this, and they always say no. They always say it's complicated. We cannot do it. Blah, 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 blah. But in the PYD case, look at all the fight they did. They never had a serious fight. They have air cover, very sophisticated air cover. They open the doors for them, and they.
Is that an ideological preference?
I said, and maybe I should not say, but I said that the American here, unfortunately, they have that idea. Some people here, Lebanon guys or the people of Syria, they have more feeling that all Sunni are similar to each other. The Kurds, the idea as a Kurd is higher than being Sunni. So that make them more able to fight ISIS without feeling sympathy at a certain time. So from that perspective, it's a way ideology.
Is that a perception, you think, or?
It's not perception, it's more information. I'm learning.
Can I add something to that?
You can as soon as I ask you my question. Go ahead.
The only other thing I want to add is one of the things the Kurds did have, and I agree with you, they can't hold these territories. I will question how they will hold these territories without coalition airstrikes. Because this is an expansive, when you take 186% more territory and you don't increase your forces, they're going to get themselves in trouble. But what the Kurds did have, that at least in the beginning some of the Sunni Arab groups didn't, was that they were cohesive. So you didn't have to get, at least in the beginning, the issue of who do you want to fight, who's your priority? And so they were moving off of this nationalist fervor that gave at least the impression that this was a relatively unified group, and that made it easier. It just was about making it easier to support them, and I think that was part of it.
Denise, you said this was a tactical alliance. From the U.S. perspective, it could be, but for those guys, it may not be. It may be enabling them for a strategic win. So how do you reconcile or not?
Well, I can't. Again, I'm speaking for myself, and there's there's different. I say groups within different agencies of the United States government, whether that be DOD, Congress, state, the administration, and there's a couple of rifts in these groups, okay? And whoever wins out, whether that's the countering ISIL folks, or the guys that want to, is a different story. But at the end of the day, if the Kurds the problem is the Kurds misinterpreting this assistance, right? I don't see that the United States has said to the Kurds, we are going to choose you as a strategic ally, and we don't care what happens with Turkey. If that were the case, or not just Turkey, Sunni Arab Gulf states. I mean, there's a lot of other issues. This is not just Turkey, or the 65% of the Syrians that are Arab. If that were the case, then they would be invited to the Geneva Accords.
In the meantime, if you're able to get Turkey to accept, not formally, but de facto, their hold on that territory, isn't that a strategic win for them, regardless if the U.S. considers that tactical or strategic?
That's not the strategic end state for the United States is defeating ISIL, and that's why I say that's why I say because the PYD is not essential to defeating ISIL, they're tactical, okay. However, look at the fact that the PYD, and I'll say the same thing for Iraq. This is very fluid. Who has taken territories now does not necessarily mean that they will hold those territories even in a couple of years. So no, I think that this is tactical. If they misinterpret it, then I think it's our responsibility to make that clear. That's what I said as using it because they have been local partners, and we at least owe that to them.
Can I add something? They did recommendation. I didn't do any recommendation. I think it's very important for the United States to look about for Syria as a Syrian without going into who are they, religious or ethnic. They think, I don't know where they get this idea that we should try this person or this group, what are their religion, this religion more close to us than this. The more they think on this and they are thinking about this, the more they spend their money and this, the more they create a problem for everyone. The more they think about Syrian, all as one as these people are Syrian, and they judge them about their project. The more they have national project, Syrian project, they are Syrian. If not, they are not, regardless if they are beer or without beer. This is not relevant. I think they are helping to stabilizing the area.
Bassam, maybe you could comment on it later. I was going to say, aren't we way past beyond that, actually? But keep your Nick, you talked about this representing some sort of example and kind of a mirror image of SDF, Turkey's SDF, but then where does coordination or potential for coordination between the US and Turkey fit into this picture? Because if you have your guys, we have our guys, how are we really working together? Because they're going to end up working at cross purposes, which already happened. Is there any kind of room for coordination, or right now serious coordination on building that local capacity you're talking about?
So the irony is that the United States has guys on both sides of these coalitions. And so you have guys in the Syrian Democratic Forces Coalition, and you have, as has been mentioned, you have DoD-backed and reportedly CIA-backed organizations that are part and actually forming a fundamental part of Operations Euphrates Shield. By my estimate, you have 15 to 20 Syrian armed opposition groups that are part of Operations Euphrates Shield. And within that group, then, you have a bloc that's composed of 8 or 9 either U.S. directly supported now, or U.S. vetted in the past, or U.S. considered for support. And so you have this interesting dynamic whereby, as my co-panelists have mentioned, you have this empowered PYD, FAGET movement within the Syrian Democratic Forces Coalition that has pushed across the Euphrates, views itself as the primary vehicle with U.S. support to take the fight to ISIS. The undergirding realities on the ground indicate that they will have to withdraw in order for both sides to deconflict and to move towards a common goal. So the point I want to emphasize about the SDF is that when we talk about Kurd seizing territory in traditionally ethnic Arab, Sunni Arab areas, that is very problematic. What has happened is there's been this evolution of perception of the SDF as a vehicle, right? As a way for there to be a territorial base of operations for U.S. and coalition forces to recruit, mobilize, train, advise, and assist non-Kurdish forces that would take, or forces that are more representative of the local demographic realities in areas that we want to take from ISIS. In the context of Manbij, for example, which is an area that is ethnically diverse, you'll have to find a way to deconflict both sides. because both sides, the Operation Euphrates Shield bloc and the Syrian Democratic Forces bloc, had some claim over Manbij. But when you go to areas like Azaz and Bab and Raqqa, there's a less strong claim from the Syrian Democratic Forces coalition's perspective, unless they're being the primary vehicle to mobilize, to train, and to assist forces that are from Raqqa, that have been expelled from it and want to take the territory back. This is the opportunity that the Operation Euphrates Shield presents, because by Operation Euphrates Shield, Turkey can build out a territorial base of operations, stage operations against Raqqa, and to bring Syrian fighters that have been expelled from the Raqqa area, that are either refugees now in Turkey, or have just newly entered Syria, or have been displaced to other areas of Syria, to mobilize them, to support them, and to allow them to stage operations Raqqa. This is the opportunity that Euphrates Shield presents, because it can take away the motivation to use the Syrian Democratic Forces as the only vehicle to mobilize and to send these forces into the fight.
Thank you for that, Nick. And Kilic, I know you have many comments on all this, but I wanted to ask you this Euphrates. How is it simply symbolic that Turkey insists on Euphrates? And what is you said the 20-kilometer depth is too narrow. How far can that go? And how does the Turkish sort of strategic thinking is around the Euphrates question and that section? Is Euphrates, because you said BYD, even if they were to pull back, there will be problems because of the issues, because of the fighting between PKK and Turkish state. So what does really Euphrates represent in all of this?
Well, first, let me say a few words about YPG. And one thing is the conflicting between SDF and the FSA sounds a good idea, but here is the big question that all the Turks ask. What was the exit strategy of the United States when it started to support YPG? So you mobilized, you empowered, you emboldened, basically, and legitimized the group. And this group is now almost 70-80% of SDF that we are talking about is more or less YPG, right? So what is the strategy that, like the moment that you leave them alone, or the moment that you cut the support, what will YPG do? So does United States has any exit strategy that the moment that we cut the support, or the moment that we have serious disagreement, the group will be what? Because Turkish perception is YPG, is PKK, is YPG, right? So there is no difference. And the artificial distinction that the administration brought and, they accepted in order to militarily assist YPG can be effective against ISIS and was effective for that region. But what will happen afterwards? And in regards to Turkish reaction to YPG, I think Denise, to get rid of the armbands wouldn't be sufficient for Turkish public opinion to consider that, okay, US is not supporting YPG, right? And in this time when we were talking about, the US military and especially CENTCOM, we keep hearing that CENTCOM has some negative opinions about Turkey and it goes all the way back to March 2003, that Turkey didn't allow the launching of US troops from Turkish soil. So now, when we are thinking otherwise, Turkey is fighting against PKK, and every day there are 3-4 casualties, soldiers, right? And they know that YPG is PKK, is YPG, and it is being supported by the United States. So what will be the impact of this to the morale of the US soldiers, and in the long run, actually, to the future of US-Turkish relations? And one more thing about the operation in Elbap, this is the critical, that 20 kilometers, even not miles, is not sufficient. But as Nick said, it is a good place to have, start your operations, train people, right? And help, and here is the big problem. When the Armed Train and Equip program started, and I was in Turkey and I had a chance to talk with many people, the problem was the Syrian opposition fighters were really good. They don't need training. they want arms, right? So each and every time there was the process of vetting these, like the soldiers, and there was disagreement. And at the end of the day, how many we have? Like 12, 16? What was the total number, right? Yeah, secret. So it's a big problem at this point. So the next administration. So what we are talking about is probably not gonna be happening in the next 1 or 2 months. So the next administration, what will be the standards or thresholds to support a group, right? Are they going to use the same vetting mechanism? Because if they use the same vetting mechanism, then nothing will change in the short or medium or long run. And in regards to Euphrates, I think it is, at this point, it is symbolic. But what I mean is the east of Euphrates, if it is controlled by YPG, and now we have YPG fighters who are trained, who are armed, who are mobilized, right? And what will happen if if they decide not to go Raqqa, and if they turn their attention to Turkey, right? We know that around, the 50-60% of YPG fighters are originated from Turkey, and they are PKK members. So what will happen? That's the big question, and that is puzzling Turkey more than anything else. And that is something that Turkish side couldn't find any answer in the statements of the U.S. officials.
Just a two-finger very quickly. I think one of the other dynamics at play, and I've mentioned this in the comments, and we've talked about this as well. When we talk about the potential for building a safe zone, so there's a safe zone in the area in which the Operation Facial functions, while there is legitimate and genuine concern on the Turkish side about the development of a heavily PKK-influenced proto-state in northeastern Syria, the United States also has legitimate concerns, and other international actors have legitimate concerns about the type of local governance that forms in the areas seized by Operation Facial. Up to this point in the conflict, the armed opposition groups on the ground have been very careful to use the Syrian Revolution, the old Syrian Republican flag. A number of the groups within this coalition, Euphrates Shield, have had problematic relationships with groups like Jarablus and other groups that don't necessarily have a vision for the future of governance in their areas of Syria that aligns with that of the stated policy goals of the United States for the future of Syria. Now, we have to be mindful that there are these conversion narratives of who governs on the ground, and that's why this is, I need to emphasize that what develops in areas taken from ISIS and other actors in territory seized by Operation Euphrates Shield in terms of the future of governance in these local areas is very important, and Turkey has an opportunity to shape the future of Syria in a very, very real way right now, and to demonstrate the types of local armed opposition groups that's empowering can in fact build out an acceptable alternative to ISIS or Jarablus and its enablers.
Well, I think I'm going to open it to questions right now because we don't have a lot of time. Unless you have comments. Yes. Can we get the microphone?
For all of the AO advisors, my comments are directed to Senator. Nobody talks about the Iranian role in the Syrian conflict. The question becomes, down the road, let's assume the regime holds. That changes the dynamic. What happens to the Kurdish forces in Syria because at that point they dispute?
Kurdish forces at that time. I don't think we have to wait till the regime goes. I think we should look about from now to 2 months from now what will happen to them. Because now we have a new movement in Hasaka, all the tribes, they are getting together against the Kurds. We have some people in Ras Al Ain, we have people in Kamishli. So this movement is going momentum. Arab momentum is going very fast against the Kurds. I think from now to 2 months from now, you will see a different map of PYD Kurdish areas. That doesn't mean about Iranian influence. Iranian, I think they are more stronger in Syria than Assad himself. I don't think Assad is relevant for Iranian. They need him just to cover. But deep inside, when we talk with the UN about, let's say, prisoner swaps, They always say if the jail or the names are under Iranian, we can get a deal. That means they have even control of the jet. If it is the names are under regime, we have nothing to do. So I don't, today Iran, I think they are very much heavy influence Syria and control Syria. Much stronger than Assad himself, unfortunately.
How about in the north?
In the north, they don't have much, but they have very good relation, or they influence the north from Barzani and Talbani. Barzani and Talbani, they always make statements that we should respect international agreement, international borders. They try in order not to be attacked from Iran, and that's what Iran requests for them. In 2012, the Barzani or Talbani, I forget which one of them, they offered to send their forces to Syria to train the Kurdish forces in Syria. And then they changed their mind because Iran told them you have to respect the international laws, and then they get the Kurdish forces to Syria, to Iraq. Kurdistan, they have been trained there, and now they are rejecting to bring them back to Syria. So Iranian influence in the Kurds is very important. We, again, Syrian day-to-day, I'm talking about very much Syrian inside Syrian perspective. They are really consumed by the attacks. They know Iran is the enemy. They know Russia is the enemy. They don't know what to do. So if you ask any Syrian from the side, they would say all are enemies. Dynamics-wise, I can say from this, when they sent the soldier, they didn't let them to come back to Syria. They emphasized that they had to respect the international border between Syria and Iraq. All this was Iranian border. And Iranian were the broker between BYD and America.
Yes.
That's okay. This is mostly for Bassam, but also
They
for the others.
more than
Well, but Denise will answer anyway. So, sure. Let us assume a future 2 months down the road in which Al-Bab and Raqqa have both fallen, maybe more than 2 months, we'll say 4 months, in which the Sunni tribes have somewhat reduced the influence in the northeastern portions, Qamishli and Haska of the YPG. There is this element that none of this current dynamic with Euphrates Shield would have happened had there not been a reconciliation and some sort of understanding between Turkey and Russia. So, and of course it is interesting that Gerasimov is in Ankara today. So my question is, at some point there will have to be a political deal if this is going to mean anything, these battlefield developments. From your position, if you were advising the opposition, can you shape a deal that would be acceptable to the Russians, to the Turks, to the Free Syrian Army and the moderate political opposition, and to the Syrians who are not in favor of the opposition? Is there space there for a political deal to emerge from that set of battlefield dynamics?
It's a good question, and it's a funny question. I mean, Russia, at the end of the day, they don't want to solve Syrian problem. They use Syrian problem as a proxy toward its relation with the United States or the West in general. They don't have any interest to solve Syrian problem. We offer them so many solutions, beyond your imagination, so many proposals for the Russian. This is the way, you choose which one, and they always say, we don't want anything. I don't think Syria can be solved by Syrian at this time. It's much bigger than Syria to solve our problems. I think the relation between Turkey and Russia is very much tactical, not strategic, on Syria. Russia involvement in Syria is more addressing the US, NATO, than Turkey. They can work on the border issue, they can work on counter ISIS, contain the Kurds in a way. I think this is the thing when we see today the cessation of hostility deal. Russia has a major role to play to protect the convoy from Turkey to Aleppo. So that was always the Russian request, how we see the border, how we make sure that this convoy is only humanitarian aid. Now the Russians are there. So I think this is more the understanding between Russia and the United States, Russia and Turkey. I don't think that Russia, till today, Russia look at Turkey as strategic when it comes to Syria. It's more tactical things to calm down the borders rather than solution. Solution is, Kerry, he said it at the last time, the solution is easy. The issue is the will, international will, political will. How to Thank you.
Maybe short comments on this, both the agreement and I was thinking when he talked about Russia. I mean, Russia and opposition don't agree on much of anything, but Russia and US agree on territorial integrity you were talking about. coming from different perspectives.
Forget even take the United States out of it. I actually think that the one issue that will bring Russia and Turkey and Iran and Syria together is the fact of Syria's territorial integrity. That I don't care what Russia does with the YPG or whatever else it is, that the last thing that Russia wants of all those countries is to undermine the sovereignty of the Syrian state, more so than anyone else. So, and I do want to make a point about all these territories and the Kurds and they'll move back. Look, so many of these patterns have occurred in Iraq as well. The difference is you never had really a disputed territories issue in Syria. Now you do, right? The Kurds have been dealing with this with different Arab groups. If they have 186% more territory, this is going to be used as a bargain, right? The more you have, the more you can bargain with later. They can't hold some of these territories, but they'll use it at the end of the day. When it comes to these areas like Manbij, they'll have to do the same that they're doing in the disputed areas in Iraq or Kirkuk. You'll have a council that's got to be mixed, and you have to have these local power sharing issues. I mean, I don't think that that is completely insurmountable if you just get away from this, as Bassam said, this notion of ethno-sectarian partition, which is just not reflective of realities on the ground. But I think at the strategic level, Rich, I have yet to find any important regional actor that wants to see the breakup of Syria. Not one. And that's the starting point that we should be working with, not talking about all of these little groups that are tactical.
I'll just say very quickly, one of the interesting dynamics of the cessation of hostilities, we saw this with the first version of cessation of hostilities, is in the context of the cessation of hostilities, we have groups that would normally have to commit forces against the Assad regime, you have to shift more forces into the anti-ISIS campaign. So we saw this in Natali with Lewis-Kurojeva. We see this with groups that form a core component of Euphrates Shield. You have Farkat Nuruddin of Zanki, Farkat Sultan of Murad, Farkat Karkasha, Division 13, Jaish al-Tahrir, Philip Hashem. All these groups have have the ability to shift more forces from fighting Assad and his allies, including IRGC mobilized militias, to the anti-ISIS fight if there's a cessation of hostilities. So an interesting dynamic that I will be looking at is if the second round of cessation of hostilities holds for an extended period of time, will that then increase the ability of Operation Euphrates Shield to build out a platform to allow it to expand its ability to in range of activities against ISIS? And that would be an interesting dynamic to follow.
Well, I'm a little more pessimistic than Bassam actually in regards to the cessation of hostilities, because we had these periods multiple times, and each and every time we see some violation of these cessation of hostilities and blaming some groups like Al-Qaeda affiliated and Syrian regime take advantage of it, and each and every time it failed. So, and there are 2 months to elections, and I'm not seeing, like at this point at least, without seeing an extended period of time that it was implemented and it was enforced, I don't see at this point too much hope for the sticking up with the cessation of hostilities.
Can I make a final point? And this is, I would say, a word of caution for Turkey, looking at what happened in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. That is, as we all, I think on this panel, agree that Turkey can play a role in some way in stabilizing buffer zone, I wouldn't underestimate, and I say this more when listening to Bassam, Syrian nationalism. That is to say, this happened with the Kurds in northern Iraq. You have Barzani, and this is where nationalism was so strong, Kurdish nationalism, that yes, you can have partners, yes, you can find a group that you can work with locally as proxies, but this is going to be a trick for Turkey, or balancing act. How do you establish these local partnerships, but don't overstep to the point where you're going to undermine Syrian nationalism, because then you can undermine your local partnerships, and that occurred and is occurring now, right, in northern Iraq, right, where you hear a lot of the Kurds saying, oh, wait a minute, you've gone too far. So I don't see that not occurring in Syria as well.
One last question, maybe.
Thank you. My name is Lucy, and my question is to Dr. Denise and Mr. Heras. Why do you think YPG is a bigger threat to Turkey than ISIS?
I could say bigger threat. We can all here in this room say, of course, you should be looking at ISIL. I'm looking at historically. I can't say should. I will just try to understand threat perceptions, okay, and strategic priorities. Why I could understand, if I was in Turkey's position, understanding history and the priority of territorial integrity of the state, that Turkey has been struggling, or the Kurds have both, since the state formation period with the idea of Kurdish separatism. So if you're looking at in the head of policymakers or officials, and then since the 80s, there's been actually an insurgent movement trying to undermine the structures of the state. Well, this is decades. I could see with Turkey would say, well, this ISIL bit, yeah, this is serious. This is a couple of years. We're going to get rid of it. But this Kurdish thing, this has been going on for decades. So I am not saying that ISIL in any way is less important. It's even more. But you asked me how we could think. I'm trying to think how Turkey could think that, because it's a much larger and longer problem that is now across various borders.
Yeah, I would agree with Denise on that point. I wouldn't rate the EPG or ISIL as a greater or lesser threat to Turkey, just from the perspective of how I hear Turkish national security policy leaders express that the EPG as a proxy for the PKK does represent a greater threat to Turkish national security. From a U.S. perspective, Turkey as a state actor is going to will need to balance in its own national interest what is and isn't a greater threat. The way I look at it in terms of trying to find a proxy comparison is a lot of the debate and discussion about, for example, what type of local councils and governance emerges in areas that are part of the Euphrates Shield operation, what emerges in Idlib with Jarablus Offensive and its enablers. And the way I look at that as proxy is some of the way that I hear Turkish national security leaders express their fear about the EPG and the PYD as building out community cover and a safe haven for operatives from the PKK to expand their operations in Turkey is the same type of analytical discussion I hear from U.S. and other national security leaders discussing why they are fearful of Jabhat al-Shem and other enablers of Jabhat al-Shem, such as Afar al-Shem, building out community cover for international Salafist jihadist operatives to conduct attacks against the West and its allies. So that's where I see a mirroring of the rhetoric.
Last round, no comments. Bassam, you want to have the last word? I know you.
I believe in the future. The history always. The Middle East, to understand the Middle East, we should always read the history. Our relation is back to the history, not to the future. The Western civilization is always look to the future because you don't have too much history. So the history taught us that no matter who will come to this part of the world will leave. So we always survive. And we hope, always we look for the administration as a superpower in that state to be more rational in its dealing with the issue of the Middle East, to be more think about how the Middle East people think about the problems and help them rather than impose its way of thinking, because that will double the problem. The Kurds is very major, clear case. They don't understand the Kurds, they don't understand the Arabs, they don't understand anything. They have a target to kick ISIS. And they spoil, or Syria, just for getting something can be done easily, much easier. I will talk one more minute, please. When ISIS arrived to Syria and to Kamal, group of Free Syrian Army, they met with senior level of government, US government. And they show her, or he, whatever, a map, where's ISIS, where they're coming from, where they go. And they told that official, how can we compete them? And they didn't ask for weapons, they asked for food. They said, in order to fight ISIS, we need to get consistent food for 1 year. So the people who trust us, we are competing ISIS. And they refused. And all these people were killed, most of them were killed. So today, the United States spent $7 or $8 billion, and they didn't pay $2 million. So again, I understand it from the culture of the United States, superpower, multinational. And we think about Syrian way, which is very small, very easy, and we can get the job done. Thank you.
Well, think this has been an excellent discussion. I want to thank my panelists. Please join us. Thank you.